I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard the front door close with that sound I knew so well, the sound of someone arriving home but not really being present, you know? It was a regular Thursday, one of those that repeat week after week with nothing special happening, and I was there cutting onions for the sauce while thinking about how my life had become this endless routine of waking up, taking care of the house, waiting for my husband to come back from work and sleeping to start. Everything over the next day. My name is Helena. I'm 36 years old, and I've been married to Ricardo for 12 years. 12 years that passed so quickly that sometimes I wonder where all that time went, where all those dreams we had when we were young and thought the whole world was at our feet ended up. Ricardo entered the kitchen with that tired expression he brought from work every day, threw his briefcase on the living room sofa, and went straight to the bedroom to change clothes without even greeting me properly. And I was already so used to it that I wasn't even bothered anymore. I just kept cutting the onions while feeling those tears burning in my eyes. Tears that I didn't know if they were from the onions or from all that accumulated frustration that I had been carrying inside me for so long. When he came back to the kitchen wearing that old comfortable t-shirt that I always asked him to throw away but he insisted on wearing, I tried to make conversation as I did every night. I asked how his day had been, if anything interesting had happened at the office, if he wanted something specific for dinner. But the answers were always the same, monosyllabic and distant, as if I were just another piece of furniture in that house. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat at the table and kept looking at his phone with all that attention he never dedicated to me anymore. And I felt that tightness in my chest that had become my constant companion in recent months. That feeling that I was becoming invisible in my own life, that I had stopped being a person to become just a function. The woman who cooked, cleaned, organized the house, and existed there in that space without really mattering. I finished preparing dinner in silence, put the plates on the table, and we sat down to eat. And it was at that moment, while I watched my husband chewing distractedly and looking at his phone, that I decided I needed to do something, that I couldn't continue living that way, because I was dying inside a little bit each day that passed. I took a deep breath, gathered all the courage I had, and asked him if everything was okay between us, if he still loved me, if there was still anything left of that couple in love that we were at the beginning of our relationship. Ricardo looked up from his phone for the first time that night and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It was a mixture of surprise, irritation, and perhaps even a bit of guilt. And he stayed silent for a few seconds that seemed to last an eternity before responding that, of course he loved me, that I shouldn't be inventing problems where they didn't exist, that he was just tired from work, and that I needed to stop being so dramatic. Those words hit me like a punch in the stomach because I knew I wasn't being dramatic. I knew that something was very wrong in our marriage and that pretending everything was fine wasn't going to make the problems magically disappear. But I also knew that insisting at that moment would only generate an argument that I didn't have the energy to face, so I just nodded and went back to eating in silence while feeling that lump in my throat that appeared whenever I swallowed my words and my feelings. The days went by and the situation only got worse. Ricardo started coming home later and later, always with excuses about meetings that ran long, urgent projects that needed to be finished, important clients that demanded special attention. And I pretended I believed all that, even though deep down in my soul, I knew something wasn't right. I started paying more attention to the small details, to the way he looked away when I asked questions about his work, to the way he smiled at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, to the different perfume that sometimes came impregnated on his shirt when he got home, and all these signs were accumulating inside me like evidence of something I didn't want to admit but was becoming increasingly obvious. One night, after another solitary dinner, because Ricardo had warned he would work late, I was lying in bed unable to sleep when I heard the sound of the key in the lock indicating he had arrived. I looked at the clock and saw it was past midnight, and when he entered the room trying to make as little noise as possible, I pretended I was sleeping, just so I wouldn't have to face that situation at that moment. The next morning, I woke up with the determination that I needed to have a serious conversation with my husband. I could no longer continue living in that constant uncertainty, in that anguish of not knowing what was happening in my own life. So I waited for him to have breakfast, and before he left for work, I blocked the door and said we needed to talk. Ricardo looked at me with that expression of someone who is in a hurry and doesn't have time for serious conversations. But I didn't let myself be intimidated and said he needed to listen to me, that I deserved to know what was happening, that I had the right to know why our marriage had transformed into that farce of a relationship where two strangers shared the same roof but didn't share anything else besides that. He sighed with impatience, looked at his watch and said, we didn't have time for that conversation at that moment, that he was late for an important meeting and that we would talk at night when he came back from work. But I didn't accept that answer and said no, that the conversation would be now because I couldn't stand waiting anymore, couldn't stand being left in second place anymore, couldn't stand being treated as if I wasn't important. That's when he said the words that changed everything, the words that echoed in my head for days and days after that terrible moment. He looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in him before and said that there really was another woman in his life, that this woman was extremely important, and that he needed to dedicate time and attention to her, because she depended on him in a way I would never be able to understand. I felt as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet, as if all my suspicions had been confirmed at once, and I was falling into a bottomless hole, and tears started streaming down my face without me being able to control them, because what I feared most was happening. My husband was cheating on me and had just confessed it to my face, without any remorse. I asked who she was, how long this had been happening, if he loved her, if he was going to leave me for her, and he just shook his head and said, I didn't understand anything, that the situation was much more complicated than I imagined, and that he didn't have time to explain it to me at that moment because he really was late and needed to leave. He left the house, leaving me standing there in the living room with a broken heart and millions of unanswered questions, and I collapsed on the sofa, crying like I hadn't cried in years, feeling all that pain invade my chest like an avalanche I couldn't stop. How had we gotten to that point? How had I not noticed before? How had I been so naive as to believe that our marriage was just going through a difficult phase, when in reality, my husband was having an affair with another woman? The questions spun in my head nonstop, and I couldn't find answers, only that sharp pain that seemed to have no end. I spent the whole day in that state of shock, unable to eat, unable to do anything but sit there thinking about everything that had happened, about all the signs I had ignored, about all the times I had given Ricardo the benefit of the doubt when I should have confronted him directly. And the guilt mixed with anger, mixed with sadness, formed a cocktail of emotions that left me completely paralyzed. When night came and Ricardo came home, I was prepared to demand complete explanations, to know all the details of that betrayal, to decide what I was going to do with my marriage and my life. But he arrived with that same tired expression as always and said we needed to postpone our conversation because an urgent problem had come up at work, and he needed to solve that before anything else. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he be so insensitive as to think I would simply accept waiting longer after the bomb he had dropped in my lap that morning? I said no, that the conversation would be at that time, and that if he wasn't willing to give me answers, then it was better for him to pack his bags and leave for good, because I wasn't going to accept being treated that way anymore. And that's when he lost his patience with me, for the first time in all those years of marriage. Ricardo shouted that I didn't understand anything about his life, about the pressures he faced every day, about the responsibilities he carried on his shoulders, and said that that other woman was really more important at that moment, because she was going through a very difficult situation and needed him in an urgent way, and that I needed to stop being selfish and think only about myself, because there were much bigger things happening. Those words hit me like stabs directly in the heart. He was telling me to my face that another woman was more important than me, that I was selfish for wanting attention from my own husband, that I should simply accept that situation and stay quiet in my corner while he dedicated his time and attention to his mistress. I couldn't believe that this was the same man I had married 12 years ago. The same man who had knelt on the beach and proposed to me saying I was the love of his life and that he would never let anything or anyone come between us. How had everything changed so much that we had reached that terrible moment? That night, Ricardo slept on the living room sofa, and I stayed locked in the bedroom crying until I had no more tears to cry. And when I finally managed to fall asleep, it was almost dawn, and I was physically and emotionally exhausted. The following days were a blur of pain and confusion. Ricardo continued arriving home late and leaving early in the morning, and the few times we ran into each other around the house, we stayed in tense silence, not knowing what to say to each other, because it was as if an insurmountable abyss had been created between us. I thought about calling my mother and telling her everything that was happening, but I couldn't because I was ashamed to admit that my marriage had failed, that I hadn't been able to keep my husband interested in me, that there was another woman more important in his life than me, who was the legally married wife. I thought about hiring a private detective to find out who this woman was, where they met, how long this had been happening, but I didn't have the courage or money for that because I had given up my job a few years ago to dedicate myself completely to the house and depended financially on Ricardo for everything. It was a week after that terrible argument that everything changed in a way I could never have imagined. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen having coffee alone when I heard the doorbell ring. And when I went to open the door, I came face to face with a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was older than me. Must have been in her early 60s, graying hair pulled back in a bun, simple but elegant clothes, and had on her face an expression of tiredness mixed with determination that immediately put me on alert. I asked if I could help her with something, and she asked me if that was Ricardo Santos's residence, and when I confirmed yes, she asked to come in because she needed to talk to me about something very important. My heart immediately raced because I thought that was the other woman, that she had come to my house to confront me, or maybe to tell me that Ricardo was going to leave me for her, and I almost closed the door in her face, but something in the way she looked at me made me change my mind, and I let her in. We sat in the living room and stayed silent for a few seconds, she observing me with those eyes that seemed to be evaluating every detail of me, and I waiting for her to say what she had come to do there because the anxiety was killing me inside. Finally, she sighed deeply and said she needed to tell me some things about Ricardo that I probably didn't know, and my heart froze because I was sure she was going to confirm the betrayal and maybe give me horrible details about the affair he was having. But what she said next was something completely different from what I was expecting, something that turned my understanding of everything upside down and made me realize I had interpreted the situation in a completely wrong way. She said her name was Margarita, that she was the mother of a girl named Sophia, and that Ricardo was Sophia's stepfather for more than 10 years, since when Margarita and Ricardo had a brief relationship years ago before he met me. I was completely confused because Ricardo had never told me anything about having been someone's stepfather in the past, had never mentioned any Margarita or any Sophia, and it made no sense for him to have hidden that from me during all those years we were together. Margarita must have noticed my confusion because she continued explaining that her relationship with Ricardo had lasted only a few months, but that at that time, Ricardo had developed a very strong bond with Sophia, who at the time was only 6 years old and was suffering a lot from the absence of her biological father, who had abandoned the family. Ricardo had become a father figure to Sophia, had spent hours playing with her, helping with homework, taking her to the park, and the girl had become very attached to him because she finally had someone who filled that void her father had left. But when the relationship between Margarita and Ricardo ended, Sophia was devastated because it was like she was losing a father for the second time. And Ricardo had been devastated too because he really loved that child and didn't want to abandon her, but knew that keeping in touch would be too complicated. Margarita told me that in the first months after the breakup, Ricardo still called occasionally to talk to Sophia, still sent birthday and Christmas gifts, still met with them occasionally to have ice cream or go to the movies, but over time those meetings became rarer until they practically stopped happening. She said she perfectly understood why Ricardo had distanced himself, knew it was difficult for him to maintain that bond without being in a relationship with her, and that she had never blamed him for it, because each had moved on with their life. But now, so many years later, Sophia was 17 years old and was going through an extremely difficult time. She had been diagnosed with leukemia 6 months ago and was undergoing chemotherapy treatment that was very aggressive and was destroying her physically and emotionally. Margarita said that Sophia had asked to see Ricardo again, that she remembered him so fondly and wanted him to be present in that very difficult moment of her life. And after much hesitation, Margarita had managed to find his contact and had called asking if he could go visit Sophia in the hospital. I heard all that in complete shock, processing each word Margarita was saying and finally beginning to understand what had happened in recent weeks, why Ricardo had started coming home late, why he was always so distant and worried, why he had said there was another woman in his life who was very important and who needed his attention. The other woman wasn't a mistress, as I had automatically assumed. It was a sick girl he had loved as a daughter many years ago and who was needing him in that moment of life or death. Margarita continued saying that Ricardo had answered her phone call with surprise, but had immediately agreed to go visit Sophia in the hospital, and since then he had been going there every day after work, spending hours by her bedside talking, reading books to her, trying to cheer her up and give her strength to continue fighting against that terrible disease. I felt a wave of shame and guilt invade me because I had accused my husband of betrayal when in reality he was doing something beautiful and generous. He was dedicating his time and energy to care for a girl who desperately needed support and who considered him an important father figure. I asked Margarita why Ricardo hadn't told me anything about that, why he had let me think the worst, and she said she had asked him not to tell because Sophia didn't want many people to know about her disease. She was ashamed of being bald because of chemotherapy, was too emotionally fragile to deal with people's compassion and pity, and had asked to keep all that as secret as possible. Ricardo had agreed to respect Sophia's wishes, and that's why he hadn't told anyone, not even me, and Margarita said she had come to my house that day because she had realized the situation was causing problems in my marriage and couldn't let Ricardo suffer consequences in his personal life for doing such a good thing. I didn't know what to say. The words simply wouldn't come out of my mouth because I was feeling so many different emotions at the same time that I couldn't process all that at once. There was the immense relief of knowing my husband wasn't cheating on me. There was the shame of having doubted him and accused him unjustly. There was the guilt for having fought with him and made him feel bad, when in reality he was going through an extremely difficult situation trying to support a sick girl, and there was also a deep sadness, because I realized how much our marriage had deteriorated to the point that I no longer trusted him, and he didn't feel comfortable sharing with me something so important that was happening in his life. Margarita took my hand and said she perfectly understood my reaction, that any woman in my position would have thought the same thing, but that now that I knew the truth, she hoped I could support Ricardo because he was really needing support too, was suffering seeing Sophia fight against that disease and feeling powerless for not being able to do more for her besides being present. After Margarita left, I sat in the living room for a long time, just thinking about everything that had happened, about how I had misinterpreted the situation, about how my insecurity and my fears had led me to wrong conclusions that almost destroyed my marriage. I realized that we both had guilt in that story, Ricardo for not having been transparent with me from the beginning, and me for not having given him the benefit of the doubt, for not having tried to understand what was happening before jumping to hasty conclusions about betrayal. When Ricardo came home that night, I was waiting for him in the living room, and when he saw me sitting there, he seemed surprised and a little apprehensive, probably expecting another argument or more accusations. But instead, I got up and walked to him with tears in my eyes and said that Margarita had come to visit me, that I knew everything about Sophia, about the leukemia, about his visits to the hospital, and that I was sorry, really sorry for not having trusted him, for having thought the worst, for having made that difficult situation even worse with my accusations. Ricardo was silent for a moment, and then he also started crying, said he was sorry for not having told me from the beginning, that he should have trusted me and shared that weight with me instead of trying to carry everything alone, that he had thought he was doing the right thing by keeping it secret to protect Sophia's privacy, but had ended up creating an abyss between us that almost destroyed our marriage. We hugged there in the living room and cried together, releasing all that tension accumulated during weeks, all that pain and misunderstanding that had settled between us. And when we finally separated, I asked him to tell me everything about Sophia, about what it had been like to meet her again after so many years, about how she was dealing with the disease, about what the doctors said about her chances. Ricardo sat with me on the sofa and spent the next hours telling me everything, talked about how shocked he had been when Margarita called, telling him about the leukemia, about how his heart had broken when he saw Sofia for the first time in the hospital, so different from the healthy and full-of-life girl he remembered, talked about how she had cried when she saw him and had said she had missed him so much all those years, about how they had talked about the past and the present and the fears she had about the future. He told me that Sofia was responding well to treatment, but still had a long way ahead, that the doctors were cautiously optimistic, but nothing was guaranteed, and that she needed all the support possible to get through that. Ricardo said he felt torn between wanting to be there for Sofia every day and at the same time not wanting to neglect our marriage, that he had tried to juggle everything but clearly hadn't succeeded, and that now that I knew the truth, he hoped we could find a way to deal with that situation together instead of letting it separate us. I held his hand and said yes, that of course we were going to deal with that together, that I wanted to support him and help him help Sofia, and that maybe I could even meet her if she was comfortable with that, because I understood now how much that girl meant to him and wanted to be part of that journey by his side. In the following days, Ricardo and I had several deep conversations about our marriage, about how we had let routine and lack of communication create a distance between us, about how we needed to work together to reconnect and strengthen our relationship instead of letting life's difficulties separate us. We decided to start couples therapy to help us navigate that difficult moment and learn to communicate better. And we also agreed that I would accompany Ricardo on some of his hospital visits if Sofia agreed, because I wanted to meet that girl who was so special to my husband and offer my support too. When Ricardo asked Sofia if she would mind meeting me, she said she would be happy because she had heard him talk so much about me and wanted to meet the woman who had won his heart. On the day I finally went to visit Sofia at the hospital, I was very nervous, didn't know what to expect or what to say to a 17-year-old girl who was fighting cancer. But the moment I entered the room and saw that thin and bald girl, but with a warm smile on her face, all my worries disappeared. Sofia was incredible, had a sharp sense of humor despite everything she was going through, told stories about her memories of Ricardo when she was little, about how he used to make funny voices when reading stories to her at bedtime, about how he taught her to ride a bike, and was more nervous than she was when he took off the training wheels, and I could see in her eyes how precious those memories were to her, how important Ricardo had been in shaping the person she had become. I spent the whole afternoon there talking with Sofia and Margarita, listening to stories, laughing at jokes, and feeling as if I was beginning to be part of that small extended family that had reunited around that brave girl. When we left the hospital that night, Ricardo held my hand and said, "Thank you," said it meant the world to him that I was willing to be part of that situation, and I replied, "That's what couples did. They supported each other in difficult times, and that I was sorry for not having done that from the beginning." The following weeks were intense. We continued visiting Sofia regularly at the hospital and later at home when she received temporary discharge between chemotherapy sessions, and gradually I got to know more about that extraordinary girl who refused to let the disease define who she was. Sofia had dreams of studying medicine, wanted to become a pediatric oncologist to help other children who were going through what she was going through, and we talked for hours about her plans for the future, about the colleges she wanted to apply to, about the life she was going to live when she finally won that battle. Ricardo always participated in these conversations with a special sparkle in his eyes, like a proud father listening to his daughter talk about her dreams, and I increasingly realized how genuine and deep their relationship was, how much they really cared about each other despite all the years they had been apart. Sofia's treatment was long and difficult. There were moments when things seemed to be improving, and moments when we were very afraid of losing her. But through all that, Ricardo and I remained united, supporting each other and supporting Sofia and Margarita on that scary journey. Our marriage not only survived that storm, but came out strengthened from it, because we learned to communicate better, to trust each other even when things seemed confusing, to work together as a team instead of living parallel lives under the same roof. Couples therapy helped us a lot to process everything that had happened and to develop tools to deal with future conflicts in a healthier way. And I realized that that crisis, as painful as it had also been an opportunity for growth both individually and as a couple. After almost a year of intensive treatment, Sophia finally received the news we were all waiting and praying to hear. She was in remission, the cancer had been defeated, and she could finally start rebuilding her life. The celebration at the hospital that day was emotional. There were tears of joy, tight hugs, relieved laughter, and a palpable feeling that we had gone through something transformative together that had changed all of us in profound ways. Sophia hugged Ricardo and said thank you for having come back into her life when she needed him most, said that knowing he was there every day had given her strength to keep fighting even in the most difficult moments. And Ricardo cried and said he was the one who should thank her for letting him be part of that journey, for reminding him of what really mattered in life. Today, 3 years after all that, my relationship with Ricardo is better than ever, and Sophia has become an important part of our lives, almost like the daughter we never had. She's in medical school, fulfilling her dream of becoming a doctor, and we see each other regularly for family dinners where we talk about everything and laugh a lot about our stories. Margarita has also become a dear friend, and sometimes I reflect on how all that could have ended in a completely different way if she hadn't taken the initiative to come to my house that day to tell me the truth. I could have continued thinking Ricardo was cheating on me, could have asked for divorce, could have thrown away 12 years of marriage because of a terrible misunderstanding, and would have lost not only my husband, but also the chance to meet Sophia and be part of her incredible journey of survival and recovery. This experience taught me so many valuable lessons about relationships, trust, communication, and about not jumping to conclusions without having all the facts. And I share this story whenever I can, because I think many couples go through similar situations where lack of communication and insecurity create problems that could be avoided if we just talked openly with each other. I learned that when your partner is acting differently or distant, there can be millions of reasons for that don't involve betrayal. It could be work stress, health problems, financial worries, or in our case, a delicate situation involving someone from the past he was trying to help but didn't know how to talk about it. I learned that trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship, and that when we start doubting without real reason, we start destroying that foundation brick by brick until eventually everything crumbles. But I also learned that even when we make mistakes, even when we let insecurity and fear guide us instead of reason and trust, it's still possible to fix things if both parties are willing to work on it, to be honest about their feelings and needs, to forgive and move forward together. My marriage with Ricardo isn't perfect. We still have our challenges and our arguments like any other couple. But now we know how to deal with these situations in a more mature and constructive way. We know we can trust each other even when things get difficult, and we know that together we are much stronger than alone. Sophia's story showed us that in a way, nothing else could have shown. Taught us about compassion, about empathy, about the importance of being present for the people we love, even when it requires personal sacrifices. Looking back now, I can see that terrible period where I thought my husband was cheating on me was actually a blessing in disguise. It was the shake our marriage needed for us to wake up and realize we had drifted apart from each other over the years, that we had stopped really seeing and hearing each other, that we had become strangers living under the same roof instead of partners living a shared life. The crisis forced us to look honestly at our relationship, to identify the problems we had been ignoring for so long, and to take active steps to fix these things before it was too late. If Margarita hadn't shown up that day, if Ricardo and I hadn't had those difficult but necessary conversations, if we hadn't decided to fight for our marriage instead of simply giving up, I'm sure we would have gotten divorced eventually, and it would have been a tragedy because deep down, we still loved each other. We had just forgotten how to demonstrate that love in ways the other could feel and recognize. So if you're reading this story and identifying with any part of it, if you're also going through a difficult time in your relationship where you feel your partner is distant or hiding something from you, I want you to know that before drawing hasty conclusions, before accusing or giving up, it's worth having an honest and open conversation about what's happening. It can be scary to open up that way. It can be uncomfortable to confront problems directly instead of pretending they don't exist. But it's the only way to really solve things and save your relationship if it still has salvation. And even if you discover that your fears are founded, that there really is betrayal or some other serious problem, at least you'll know the truth and can make informed decisions about your future instead of living in uncertainty and constant anguish. My main message with this story is that relationships require constant work, require open and honest communication, require trust and willingness to give the benefit of the doubt even when things seem suspicious, and require compassion both for your partner and for yourself. We are all human. We all make mistakes. We all have moments of weakness or bad judgment. But what defines a strong relationship is not the absence of problems, but rather the way we deal with these problems when they appear. Ricardo and I could have let that misunderstanding destroy our marriage, could have become just another divorce statistic. But instead, we chose to fight. We chose to communicate. We chose to trust each other again, even after everything that had happened. And that choice made all the difference in the world. And as for Sophia, that brave girl who fought cancer and won, who taught me so much about resilience and about never giving up even when the odds seem against you, she continues to be an important and dear presence in our lives. Sometimes when we're together, she jokes, saying it was she who saved my marriage by getting sick. And although it's a macabre way of seeing things, there's a truth in that, because it really was her situation that forced us to confront the problems we had been ignoring. But I always respond saying it wasn't her disease that saved my marriage. It was her courage in asking to see Ricardo again. It was Margarita's courage in coming to my house to tell the truth. It was our courage in deciding to fight for our relationship instead of simply giving up, and that we all had to do our part in that healing journey, both Sophia's healing and my marriage's healing. I hope this story has touched your heart in the same way that living this experience touched mine. I hope you take valuable lessons about relationships and communication and trust. And I hope that if you're going through something similar, you find the strength to have the difficult conversations you need to have and to fight for your relationship if it's worth it. And if you liked this story, if it made you reflect on your own life and your own relationships, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Know if you've been through something similar, if you can identify with the fears and insecurities I felt, and how you dealt with similar situations in your life, so leave your comment down here sharing your story, because I read them all and get emotional with each one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, because I share real stories like this regularly. Stories about relationships, about overcoming, about life lessons I learned along my journey. And you don't want to miss any of these stories that can help you or inspire you in some way. And if this story moved you or made you reflect on something important in your life, leave your like down here, because this helps me know I'm on the right path, that these stories are really making a difference in people's lives, and motivates me to continue sharing my experiences with you. And if you know someone who is going through a difficult time in their relationship, someone who could benefit from hearing this story and knowing they're not alone, share this video with that person, because sometimes all we need is to know that other people have been through similar situations and managed to overcome them. And that can make all the difference in the world for someone who is feeling lost and hopeless. Thank you for watching until the end. Thank you for being part of this incredible community we're building together, where we can share our stories and our experiences without judgments, where we can learn from each other and grow together, and where we can find support and understanding in the most difficult moments. Life is a journey full of ups and downs, of moments of joy and moments of sadness, of achievements and challenges. But what makes this journey easier to navigate is knowing we're not alone, that there are other people going through similar things, and that together we are stronger than we could ever be alone. So thank you again for being here, for having dedicated your time to read my story, and see you in the next video with more stories, more lessons, and more moments of genuine connection between us.